Hello. Hi, everyone. That suddenly stopped. It's nice to see you all. My name is Vlad Galibov. I'm the head of Omdia's Cloud and Data Center Research Practice. You probably heard about us mentioned quite a few times at the keynote. What we do is we do technology research. The people in my team are all industry insiders. They kind of live and breathe the different technologies in the cloud and data center industry. And today we're going to show you the results of the survey. So I know you've seen the big numbers, but we'll double click and we'll show you some of the feedback and some of the qualitative work that we did to be able to derive the numbers. And I'm joined here by two of the people, two of the principal analysts in my team. We have Dennis Hahn, who is our data center storage expert, and we have Moises Levy, who's our physical infrastructure and sustainability expert. And what we're going to do today is we're going to make sure that we have quite a bit of time to talk about trends, not just look at the big numbers. I know that as people in the industry, you want to see, kind of not just figures, but also feedback and an understanding of how you need to change your strategy. So we're going to start by looking at the numbers. But we're actually going to dissect them. We're going to cut them in several ways. Then we're going to take a look at some of the feedback that we received from the vendor ecosystem, because we talked to a lot of the vendors and system integrators for open compute equipment. And we're also going to look at the large-scale end-user survey that we did. We hinted on the survey in the press release that we did, but actually, this is the first time that we're going to show the results in detail and discuss the different drivers behind them. And then we're going to have Q&A. One of the things that we did is we utilized the crowd of respondents that we had, nearly 300 people in the survey, to actually ask them about general data center investment trends. So we're not just going to talk about open computing, we're also going to talk about sustainability and overall data center investment going around in the next 24 months. So if we kind of go back to the numbers for a second, the number that you heard mentioned on the stage was 46 billion, and that is the sales that we estimate for OCP recognized equipment in 2025. To get there, we actually start at 16 million in 2020. So the market at the moment is hitting about 16 million, and most of the revenue comes from servers. But actually, over the course of the 5-year horizon, we anticipate a differentiation to happen from a technology perspective. What we've seen is that a lot of the component categories that the OCP community has worked on are actually very popular, and they're being deployed in non-OCP servers. A very simple example is HPE have announced that their Apollo servers, who are proprietary designs, are going to use OCP NICs. Similarly, the Open Acceleration Module is being used by many of the many service providers in China, even though they don't use open compute equipment from the OCP. So there is an increasing kind of influence on different technology segments, not just servers, that is happening throughout the market. And we also are seeing a diversification from a regional perspective. The Americas continue to dominate the market, but though the expansion of the components are really driving a change in Asia Pacific. And I know that the lines don't move very fast, but remember, a lot of the data centers that Facebook and Microsoft have are in America. So as a result, we don't anticipate that they will stop investing. But in EMEA, we did hear a lot of buzz, and this came from every country that you can imagine. We heard of deployments in Russia. We heard of deployments in many countries in Africa. A lot of POCs happening across the continent. So certainly, we do expect to see a lot of opportunity there. So actually, for EMEA to sustain its share, given that it's a comparatively small region when you compare it to Asia and in North America, it kind of highlights the strength of the pipeline. And from who is buying this equipment, we are seeing a change. So cloud service providers continue to be the largest market segment, but actually we are seeing more and more interest from other verticals and other basically lines of businesses. And some of the examples of new things that we heard are, well, retail and wholesale is starting to grow. And here I'm not just talking about Target. We actually heard of a lot of POCs with retailers, especially in America. We also, we heard of the open edge driving opportunity in enterprises where we haven't really seen open compute equipment play before. Like one of the crazy examples was of a deployment in a fishery in Europe, where open edge servers were used to basically process data at the edge. So certainly the opportunity is expanding. If you have followed us, this is the 5th year that we're doing this survey and this study, and communication service providers, we've highlighted them for a long time as being a key market segment. And we certainly anticipate that they will continue to be a key market segment for the Open Compute project. So today, hyperscale cloud service providers are still a dominant client of this equipment. But by the end of the horizon, they're almost half. So we see the scales start to change where there's, in essence, more and more deployment of different technologies across the verticals. And when I show you the end user survey results in a moment, you'll see kind of why we're making this bold prediction. It doesn't come out of thin air. So before we go into the end user data, I wanted to very quickly show you what we heard from vendors. So we talked to vendors of different types of open compute equipment. Some were physical infrastructure, some were IT infrastructure, and some were system integrators. And ultimately, they confirmed a lot of the feedback that we saw in sales data. So sales data pointed to a diversification of clients, and we ended up hearing that the vendors are partnering with more and more diverse end users. So pretty much all of the vendors had clients who are cloud service providers, some hyperscale, some tier 2. But what we heard is that this year particularly, most of the vendors had at least one other vertical. And they truly mentioned a large number of different deployments. It was also interesting to see that the public sector, in essence, government investment, that kicked off in the US in terms of open compute equipment is now happening elsewhere in the world. In EMEA, some government tenders had openness as a requirement for when people were bidding, which we thought was very interesting. We haven't seen this quite yet in some of the Asian countries, but it is possible that as the push for sustainability continues, we start to see this trend that kind of started in EMEA start to move east. And in terms of why, we asked vendors, what are the reasons that your clients are giving you for deploying open compute equipment? And for the first time, open source hardware came in as much of a reason as cost. And for sure, cost was a big discussion point in the interviews with the vendors, but it wasn't the only discussion point. And it was interesting to hear that some of the supply chain situation that we're struggling with right now in terms of particularly the semiconductor shortage actually has played to the advantage of some open compute equipment vendors, where end users are looking for a multi-source ecosystem of equipment, and they think that open computing is one option for that. So this idea of vanity-free hardware is kind of very well aligned with a multi-source strategy and plays well when there's a supply shortage. We also heard that when it comes to barriers for growth, actually staffing is a really big issue. Many vendors said that they could have grown much faster if they had more salespeople, if they were able to recruit quicker, if they had more support staff, if they were able to partner with more distributors. If they, so in general, if there was more people on the ground supporting the ecosystem, it could have grown even faster. So many kind of gave us several times growth year on year, but actually they could have done even more had they had the people. And notable quotes were along the lines that you would anticipate, that open is a requirement. Sonic was mentioned as becoming a de facto standard for NOS in the industry. And we heard that open edge repeatedly could be very big, just based on the number of POCs out there. And for me, it's very interesting that that open edge is a potential for communication service providers, but actually a lot of enterprises are interested in it. Today on stage you heard that Target is planning to deploy the open edge in their stores, and we've already are tracking a large number of POCs for smaller deployments of open edge in different European countries, for example. So the meat of the discussion is ultimately this end user survey that I mentioned that we did. And we basically targeted data center operators or companies who purchase equipment but place it in co-location because they don't have their own facility. They were based in 4 countries. We decided to be very selective so that the sample will be very representative of each country, so that there is a large number of respondents within each country. And we wanted all of them to be decision makers. We wanted all of them to be the person who a vendor wants to influence, for example. So the sample was also very well distributed, which was very interesting. We had a large number of cloud service providers, which would be anticipated given that these are companies who operate data centers. But you can see there is a large number of financials, manufacturing, healthcare companies, and a long tail of energy and utilities, for example. And in terms of the size, there's a pretty nice distribution, what we would like to see in the analyst community, so that the majority of the world is demonstrated in terms of different companies. So when we asked this sample of people what was their familiarity with the OCP, we were very surprised to see that the overwhelming majority, nearly all of the respondents, were familiar with the OCP. And this was actually the case in every country, even countries that perhaps might not be as associated with open computing, like France. And France did trail behind the US in terms of familiarity by a few points, but it was still pretty high. So why we asked that question because familiarity has a strong correlation with people actually then doing something with that knowledge. So when we asked the same sample, have you ever trialed or tested open compute equipment? Most people said that they have, which was again, I would say a larger number than what we anticipated. And we saw that particularly the medium-sized companies, that the biggest share of the distribution had trialed and tested. And when we asked them, the people who didn't test, they said that awareness is the reason why they didn't. So in essence, that 23% that decided not to test, they didn't because they're still not as aware of the benefits of OCP. So this points that there is still some room to grow in terms of creating awareness of the open compute equipment out there, but actually still only 66 respondents out of nearly 300 didn't test because they didn't know enough. What was more impressive is that 90% of those tests actually resulted in a production deployment afterwards, which was very surprising and very kind of overwhelmingly positive when we looked at the data. We asked people, why did you decide to deploy in production? And they said that improving energy efficiency, reducing energy consumption, in essence, is a big reason why they did it. And this is an answer that we've heard before, but we've never heard it from such a large sample of companies that is distributed across many different countries. We also heard the expected cost as something that was pointed out, but actually open source hardware scored very high. And I want to remind you that ultimately the vendors told us people care about openness now, and this actually proved that. Following hyperscale cloud service provider innovation was another high-scoring reason why people deployed it. And actually, this was something that we heard from the vendors as well. They told us that people perceive the OCP as an innovator and that they want to be associated with the community. So that was also very interesting. In terms of the size of the deployments, we also were pretty impressed that, we're talking about tens of racks here. Most of the people had deployed 11 to 50 racks. And I have cut this data in many ways to try to see a different trend. When I looked at the different industries, when I looked at the different countries, this actually continued to be the case. This 11 to 50 racks seems to be the sweet spot. Of course, when you look at co-location, there was a slightly larger share of 6 to 10. When you look at the larger companies, they would have larger deployments. But overall, there was this predominant deployment size of 11 to 50 racks. There was a small number of people who didn't go into production deployment after testing. Remember, I said that 90% decided to deploy, but 10 didn't. 10% decided that after testing, they do not want to deploy into production. And actually, that is where we saw a disparate number of reasons. So some people said that they didn't deploy because of lack of software compatibility, lack of expertise, seamless interoperability. There was a lot of different reasons. There wasn't one kind of really standing out reason. As you can see, they're kind of all evenly spread. I also would caution you that 23 respondents is not a lot for us to start thinking about statistical significance here. So it's definitely interesting to see, but it's a very 10% of the people who tested is still a small number who didn't deploy. So at this point, I wanted to take a little break, and I want this to be a session where we talk and engage. So, maybe we can have a quick Q&A and see if there's any immediate questions that have arisen now that you've seen the data, before we go into talking about a bit more of a broad market data points and some of the things that we've seen.
Got one over here, Vlad.
Yes, go ahead.
What are your categories for hyperscale versus cloud?
Yes.
How do you define hyperscale versus cloud?
So we define hyperscale by ultimately having the largest possible data center in terms of footprint. And we found that we had to also add equipment to that. So also populating it with your own equipment. So we actually count exactly 8 companies right now as hyperscalers. That's Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance, who really ramped up purchases in the last few years. Actually, I should have said Meta, but you get it. Any other questions? Yes?
Can you go back a few slides?
Yes? Yes.
No, sorry, the next slide. Open compute equipment. How confident are you that they understood this is equipment that is OCP certified versus, any open service?
Yeah.
If they didn't understand it, that could dramatically skew the.
That is correct. So the question that the gentleman is asking, if anyone didn't hear it, is how did you know that they knew what open compute equipment is, what OCP equipment is? And what I didn't share is that there was a screener in the beginning of the survey, and the screener really nailed down the OCP kind of idea. And we also asked very specific questions that I haven't had time to put all of the questions that we asked, but there was very specific equipment detailed questions that really are able to indicate the level of knowledge in the sample.
This is shocking.
It is shocking, yes. And I would say this. What I found out that was very interesting is I met with the business development manager for the OCP in EMEA, and he hadn't heard of some of the deployments that I heard when I talked to Wiwin. And then when I talked to Wiwin, they hadn't heard of some of the deployments of Wiwin equipment that system integrators were enabling. So the ecosystem really has expanded. When you talk to some of the vendors, they tell you, oh, I don't have many clients outside of the hyperscalers. And I'm like, okay, how many do you have? And they're like, I don't know, 50? And I'm like, that's a lot. So I really want to show you the next level of results, because that is where we get into kind of broader market. We ask people, what are they going to do from a data center investment perspective in the next 24 months? And 7 in 10 of these people that we interviewed, the 300 companies, they said that they were increased investment. We asked them what categories, and they posted to servers and storage kind of growing the most. So ultimately, we have a storage expert here. We have a physical infrastructure expert. So we designed this survey together. So let's start kind of a bit more of a conversation. Did this surprise you?
No, I mean, actually, it didn't really surprise us. And the reason is, every year we kind of do a large, comprehensive survey of thousands of companies. And data, progress in data, information kinds of things, digital transformation, and digitizing businesses, they've really started to progress there. And they've really been doing that for the last few years. So that's been ramping. And as that ramps, as that kind of matures, you start to see things like storage and servers, especially storage, become more important to that ramp, where initially, the storage isn't as important. The other thing is if you just kind of look at OCP in general, and in storage, you have the servers were always kind of leading, the storage has always kind of been a little bit behind. So in that sense, it makes sense as well, or kind of holds true. I mean, it's good to see it because we were kind of expecting it. Also, OCP is kind of known for software-defined storage, and software-defined storage in the industry right now is hot. I mean, there's really two major types of storage. What some people in like the target people call enterprise storage, which is very much operational storage. But then they also had this storage for kind of data for doing data kinds of work, analytics kind of work, monitoring dashboards. You saw that data was about 65 petabytes. Well, a few years ago, that wasn't there. That's all growth to that new type of storage, software-defined storage. And I think it's reflected here. OCP is very good at using their equipment for software-defined storage. So again, it really holds true to what I would expect to have seen.
Moses, we added a lot of physical infrastructure categories when we were doing the survey, because we wanted to really test some of the really cutting-edge technologies and then some of the kind of niche technologies like smart grid UPS. Were you surprised when you saw the results for the physical infrastructure questions?
It's very interesting. For example, one thing that was very good to hear about is that people is considering risk management. Recently, in most data center standards and best practices, the concept of risk has been incorporated. Risk is something that nobody wants to talk about it, but it's there. And it's good to hear about that, because when we implement new technologies, there is a risk involved in this deployment. So how to mitigate it, how to manage that. And also, liquid cooling is also good to know that people are looking into it. A few years ago, it was seen like in really early stages, but nowadays we can see that it is here. It is being considered by all hyperscalers nowadays as a solution for high-performance computing. We have seen huge deployment of liquid cooling abroad in other countries just for cryptocurrencies. And that's a very good case. There are very good case studies. But yes, those are really good results that all people are looking into these new solutions and can be also correlated with this sustainability effort that is at the top of the agenda of the data center industry.
Funny you should say sustainability. That was the next question we asked them. So we asked, the people who operate their own data center, if they've kicked off any sustainability efforts. And 66% said that they have. To be honest, we were not surprised what they've kicked off as efforts, given that we also know that a large portion of the sample has deployed at least some level of OCP equipment. But they said that deploying efficient equipment and renewable energy sources was what they've done. As you can see, there are a few other categories, but only a third of the sample has looked into them yet. I think for me and Moises was very good to see. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So we do have a unique definition of sustainability at Omdia. Moises, would you like to take that?
Yeah, just to give you in simple words, because I don't want to be like in academia. I have been in academia. It's not like a strict result. What is sustainability? It's about efficient and effective use of resources, taking into consideration the environment. That could be the main idea. What is it? We have to be efficient, that we are looking into more efficient equipment, a smaller footprint, but we also have to be effective. For example, you can have the most efficient car, but if you go 10 times to the grocery stores, are you being effective?
Yeah.
Okay, and also considering the environment, be careful, because you can be highly efficient, but using not being friendly with the environment. Being friendly with the environment means when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, sometimes you will see it as GHG emissions. Those are the emissions or different gases going into the atmosphere. Usually we have scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. Maybe you have heard of those numbers. Scope 1 is what we generate inside, let's say, our data center. Scope 2, those related to the energy purchase. And scope 3, that is the most challenging, is about the supply chain. But this is what is about sustainability.
And by the way, we're actually doing a whole kind of research intelligence service around sustainability, and we're not going to have time to get into a lot of detail today, but you're welcome to come over to booth C12, and we can talk about this. We geek out about sustainability all the time in our team, and have spent a lot of time to try to really define it because it's so multifaceted. Yes, go ahead.
My personal point of view, I believe that liquid cooling is a great technology, but for specific needs, like high performance computing, for specific workloads like we are seeing it right now for cryptocurrency. And it will take some time to be adopted, because as we know, we in the data center industry, we are based on some terms related to reliability and uptime to reduce the probability of failures. And when we have new technologies being implemented, we always want to know about reliability, and sometimes it takes some time.
And by the way, remember, it really depends on the workload. What we heard is actually that right now some of the OCP-inspired technologies, like the Penguin equipment that is water-cooled, is very popular because it enables a higher rack density. 50 kilowatts and 60 kilowatts seem to be a sweet spot right now. And I kind of always bring people back to the NVIDIA DGX. If you look at the rendered images of the NVIDIA DGX, you would see a rack that's fully populated. But in reality, real-life deployments would have 2 DGXs in one rack because you can't cool them otherwise. So liquid cooling is just enabling for you to actually fully populate and utilize your space.
Yeah, and for me, that number is really high. If you see in 2021, like 1/3 is looking already into liquid cooling, it's a pretty high number.
Yeah, that's a pretty high number.
And you can see this in the expo floor.
Yeah. So people who haven't done it, they haven't done it because of cost, most often. And the only thing I wanted to show you also is that sustainability credentials are important when you're choosing a co-location space. So if any of you are co-location providers, this is key. It's actually highlighted as critical. Access to more efficient equipment and renewable energy is critical for co-location providers when they're thinking of winning new clients. So something for you to think about. All of these materials are going to be available online, so you'll be able to zoom into them, and you can always ask us any more questions. The only other thing that we're going to show you is the top workloads, because we utilize the fact that we have the ear. We were talking to so many people, and they told us that data-intensive workloads are growing the fastest out of all workloads. So that is everything that we're planning to show you today. These are our details. You can find all of our research on omdia.com, and the slides today are going to be available for free, and you can see us on booth C12. Thank you.